So I'm not, as I said, I'm not sure everything Steve said, but I can probably say a few things that he can't. Like we've joked about this for years. We all got horses. We knew it was going to come, this saliva testing. So I actually think, thanks very much to Steve, and David Shoebridge from the Greens has been very persistent in New South Wales. They're on the back foot at the moment. They've certainly backed off around here, and the onus is on them now to appeal. Did you talk about your court case? Yeah, to appeal that. And then there's a new news came out this week, I think, where the Freedom of Information, the police have admitted right from the beginning that the Dragar test has been very faulty. So they've got no evidence to back it up. The catch is that third test in the lab, they don't even tell you what level it's at. It's just the presence. So maybe it could be hemp seed. I know people, no kidding, the first test was amphetamine positive for them, because occasionally they do use that. They never smoke cannabis, but they handle cannabis. When it went to the lab, they got charged with cannabis. The methamphetamine had gone. So they're just handling cannabis. So it's interesting. It might be very, very sensitive. You know, we've all got bloody cannabis in us. It's a drama. Thanks very much. Now Andrew Kavasilas is going to talk to us. Are you here, Andrew? Oh, good on you. So Andrew's long-time mate, been here in the last 20 years, and he's a hemp farmer. He's also run an experimental cannabis cafe. 15 years ahead of our time here in Nimbin, we did this experiment of very openly supplying cannabis over the counter, and you know, it got so popular that, you know, the dealers disappeared off the street a lot. I reckon the police left us alone, but then someone wrote a letter in the newspaper, and then the churches, ironically, wrote to the local member of parliament who had to write to the policeman, and they raided them all. But we're way ahead of our time in Nimbin, you've got to remember that. Andrew's also secretary of the Hemp Party, worked hard to keep it happening and registered, and now he has a big dilemma. What are we doing? Because the Greens and the Libs are about to sort of cut the rug from under us. Cheers. Anyway, thanks heaps, Andrew. The third Greek of the day. These Greeks, they're old school, I tell you.
Thanks, Michael. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It's pretty reassuring when so many new people are coming, and just to hear about medical cannabis, because obviously, you know, word of mouth, people are talking about it more. Definitely, you know, you've got state premiers talking about, you know, introducing medical cannabis regimes, and even the federal government talking about it now. I suppose in my work, I've tried to work. I suppose I've been a lobbyist for medical cannabis, for the Hemp Party, for the Hemp Embassy, on behalf of industrial hemp, medical uses of hemp, and for even social use. So, having had, you know, probably full time at it for about nearly 20 years now, and watching the evolution of it, and how the public again have taken up, it's taken up very positively. I suppose this talk is more. It's not a completely negative talk, because there are ways forward we can go with this. I suppose what I'd like to lift the lid on is the kind of words that the politicians are using at the moment. And I know a lot of people are making lots of contacts with their local members and listening to what, you know, the health ministers around the country are saying, and premiers. For us, at a political level, and even as a lobbyist level, they're lying to you. They're lying. I don't know if many people here can remember Bob Carr back in 2002, the New South Wales Premier, who was a strong advocate of medical cannabis and wanted it to happen, and we spent millions of dollars on an expert working party. We had inquiries, and it was determined that they really couldn't do it. There was international roadblocks. In my line of work, I've read right back to where the law started and where it's at, and what the analogy that I can draw, straight from the UN drug charters, the use of medical cannabis is considered the same as the use of opiates for medical purposes. In fact, there's a bunch of rules for how a country can allow opiates to be grown in its country, and there's also brief mention of medical cannabis used for scientific and medical research, and it refers you back to the rules on opium for a country to be able to do that. And when you read through, the analogy is sort of starts there. So if you wanted to grow poppies for medical purposes, and poppies and opiates that are derived from them are very valuable for medicine. I mean, you couldn't be a doctor without being able to prescribe pain relief. So the situation in the world now is you've got two foreign companies that are growing over half the world's opium in Australia. Well, no Australian company is really involved in this. The Australian economy only does a bit good because the farmers get paid and there's some processing done here. So cannabis is the same, and I suppose what is very, very important with cannabis and medical cannabis, official medical cannabis use, when we're talking in the political sense with politicians and the health department talking about it, there's no government in the world that has willingly introduced a meaningful medical cannabis regime. What we're seeing in the US, in the States, they were citizens-initiated referendums. All those state governments, going back to California, to Colorado more recently, all those state governments ran no campaigns. Canada was the same. They don't want the medical cannabis regime that's there. There was a series of court cases that ended up with the High Court fighting in favour of medical cannabis, and the High Court ordered the government to introduce a medical cannabis regime. And what's telling about all that is there is no medical clinical trials coming out of the US. There is no clinical trials coming out of Canada. There is no, the medical profession haven't embraced medical cannabis use. No one can really go to anywhere in the US or Canada and go to a doctor, tell him your symptoms, get a prescription and go and get the prescription filled. It's very tricky for doctors over there. Their insurers are quite worried. The medical profession don't magically know about dosing and regimes and what to use it for, and or they are required to because there's no registered products anywhere. So in that context, we'll bring it back to cannabis now. There's probably 3 or 4 companies that own all the opium for lawful medical purposes in the world. There seems to be just one, a company called Monsanto, that owns medical cannabis. They grow every other year in the University of Mississippi, and they distribute cannabis under the UN guidelines because they're the only recognised lawful source of cannabis. And I will talk about GW's pharmaceuticals and what's happening in Israel and put that in context for you. Cannabis is grown at the University of Mississippi, and it's distributed through a US government agency called NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And so when countries and research bodies want to do any medical cannabis cannabis research, they have to apply to this company. This agency, NIDA, has been quoted many times about their thoughts on medical cannabis, and they've said over many times that something like they only fund and supply research that looks for the negative consequences of cannabis use, not for its medical beneficial purposes. And this is a fact, that's where we are in the world. And so that's why it is very, very hard for companies to get access to a lawful source of cannabis. I might just, as a tail into what Steve was talking about earlier on the saliva testing, in about 2005 or 6, when Australia's the only country using the saliva test, and in order to bring them in, they had to do some kind of research. Vic Rhodes paid Swinburne University, some researchers over there, to do some of this research, and because they were looking at negative consequences of cannabis, they actually were able to apply to NIDA and got supplied a whole bunch of joints for scientific research, and did some driver simulation trials, and found in their own way that cannabis they thought was the worst drug to be driving on, and so that's why they that was another thing that ushered in the introduction of the saliva test. So this is getting back to the lawful source of cannabis for medical and scientific research, which is recognised by the UN. So we're in the same boat as all them. Now in Israel, and what's going on over there is a lot of research, and it is just that. A lot of it's just in test tubes, and I think not last September, but the September before at the Medical Cannabis Symposium they had down in Tamworth, it was interesting to watch. I think it was 2 or 3 Israeli researchers who were brought out here to speak, who really had a tale of woe. They had 27 years of medical cannabis research, in total about 20,000 patients, and most of those patients are in private palliative care on kibbutzes, like a community. So really, very far removed from general medical practice. So, and still they spoke of that the medical profession over there hasn't embraced medical cannabis, and so still no one can go and get a prescription. So when we look at what's happening around the world, there really is this anomaly about it's more a bottleneck of cannabis for medical and scientific research. The red herring is obviously a company called GW Pharmaceuticals. They make a couple of products, Sativex and Epidiolex, which are spoken about recently, especially by governments here and around the world, as a solution to the growing public demand for medical cannabis use. This company's been around for quite a while. I've also read stories about it being a big, one of the biggest mistakes Britain has made. We watched the formation of that company by Dr. Geoffrey Guy. Somehow he got an okay from the British government that would allow him to grow cannabis to develop products. They overlooked the sentence in the UN drug laws about it's got to be from a lawful source, and the British government gave GWs seeds that they'd taken off people and confiscated, and also gave them permission to go to the Netherlands, go to these seed companies, buy some seed and come back. From there they developed several varieties. They've got about 5 varieties now which they have bred, and they've got consistent cannabinoid variations which they can then blend and produce a consistent product like Sativex and like the more new product Epidiolex. But it's been interesting watching those products come through to the public, and they really haven't. There really is a big bottleneck around it, and it was interesting watching and listening to our Health Minister Susan Ley talking about the changes to the Narcotics Act that they're about to introduce, saying that we're going to be the world leaders, we've finally got the missing link, we're getting a company that's going to do some trialling here, and we're going to allow licensing for growing, which would lead you to believe that, well, if this company's from England, geez, England must be doing really well, medical cannabis must be up and running, and it's not. It's absolutely not. And so this is, and this red herring about GWs has been identified in numerous Australian parliamentary inquiries, and it's important for people, not just when a government in the ACT or Victoria or New South Wales says we're going to have a medical cannabis inquiry and all of that, it's important for people to then go back and read the final reports, and even the regulator bill that the Greens introduced at a federal level. That was one where, if you read the final report and the transcripts of what went down, there was an extraordinary amount of time spent on GW Pharmaceuticals and the kind of product that it is producing. But at the end in the final reports though, it basically identifies that it's too hard to use, it's too expensive, it hasn't been proven for any particular reason, or chemo or side effects of chemo. It really only has been approved for the use of spasticity relating to MS. Some people have got it in, and there has been very small clinical trials going on even here in Australia. But these are so minute, and so the product itself is not suited to dealing with harsh chronic pain that's untreatable by opiates. It's not that kind of a product. So when they do, when governments and researchers who are on our side, when they finally do get through to the government and they do allow some kind of research, it's something that's not suited. And using a commercial pharmaceutical product like this Sativex for chemo pain or side effects or or more so, epilepsy or acute pain or end-of-life pain. It's obviously not suited. People have been using traditional street cannabis, illegal pot, whatever you want to call it, which seems to be, in contemporary terms, medical cannabis seems to be the stuff that's on the street. What they're trying to introduce is a pharmaceuticalised product, and I think that these trials that are being promised to us by governments, and it's going to cost us a lot of money, may take us a long time to get through to the end, and may just prove that street cannabis, contemporary medical cannabis that's being used now, is far superior to a pharmaceuticalised product, and so we'll really be just led up another garden path, and that's another thing that I really like to do as new waves of people come into the medical cannabis realm and start looking at it, and especially activists, whether it's inspired by Dan Haslam and his parents, or inspired by some of the epileptic children, and we get another new batch of people wanting, and want to know more about why isn't it legal, what's Nimbin been doing for 20, 30 years, It's very easy to explain if people go back and have a look. We're in the same boat as every other country. So I suppose, and as the Hemp Party, we try and cut through the smoke and mirrors that the governments are using, and this is all parties, Labor, Liberal, Nationals, and the Greens, who if they do know, I'm pretty sure the government and Labor know, Nationals follow suit, how intricate and how complex the international situation is. It's all tied into the pharmaceutical industry, and I think that wherever they can make a statement that's appeasing media attention to something that's being portrayed in a positive way, the governments are going to do and say whatever they can to make you believe that they're actually doing something, but in actual fact they haven't addressed the real problems. They're not letting the public know about the depth of the problem and what can be looked at. Hemp Party's been calling for a federal inquiry into the international roadblocks on this, and really, trying to nail it down so we can identify avenues and ways in which we can go forward. I mean, that's really the only way. We do have a, albeit tenuous or third party, the farm for half the world's opium. It should give us some standing to speak on behalf, but also, I suppose, at a government level and an international level, we're one of the few countries that are actually making money from the UN drug conventions, all this opium that we're growing here. So it is complex. There's problems at an international level. Australians are not unique. There's people, really even in America and Canada and all over the world who are having these types of meetings, trying to get to the bottom of what's happening with medical cannabis in their country. They've got governments promising things all over the world, just like, we've seen the more recent media that medical cannabis is legal in Australia, and it gets broadcast all over the world. And when we read that Italy's doing it, that Spain's doing it, and Israel, well, when we really look, it's not really, and it's, even in America, we say it's not really happening properly for the majority of people who would find benefit from cannabis, who have never smoked cannabis, who've never been stoned. They're never going to need to smoke cannabis or be stoned to use cannabis for medical purposes. So when you look at, 80 to 90% of the people who would benefit from cannabis, that never smoked, it's easy to understand that cannabis hasn't been embraced, or it's really not really going in these countries that we think there is something happening. There really are ad hoc regimes being put together, and I suppose even that, and this is what people don't recognise, in Canada and the US, prime examples where medical cannabis has been approved, reluctantly by the government. It is in place, it is an ad hoc situation, and you've got the mix of medical cannabis use and recreational or social cannabis use. There's actually been positive consequences of that. You're looking at a separation between hard and soft drugs. You're looking at primarily a cannabis community that doesn't like other drugs, otherwise keep to themselves. they're otherwise law-abiding citizens. And then you're looking at overall in society, and these are facts. They're, you know, domestic violence incidences are going down, mental health issues are being addressed more easily, and people are self-medicating on their cannabis, whether they're, you know, were getting it, you know, illicitly under a black market before. Now they can get some kind of a thing from their doctor. They can use cannabis, and there is a regulation there. They can go to a shop, a dispensary, and buy cannabis on a regular basis, something consistent that they like. It's not a black market. And they go, like, and when we do talk of social or recreational use of cannabis, it really is not unlike what we would imagine was happening under alcohol prohibition in the US. There was a 13-year trial. It really didn't work at all. It turned cannabis use from what was something marijuana that the Mexicans used to smoke, you know, like in our situation, that you know, alcohol use, which was, you know, beer and wine and civilised scotches to under prohibition, you know, you couldn't get any of those, but there was moonshine everywhere. There was corruption that infiltrated every segment of police, the judiciary, the politicians, and still they thought it was going to be a good idea, and police were saying, well, we shouldn't lift this prohibition on alcohol, we've nearly got it beat, you know, while Al Capone was paying their wages. So, look, alcohol, and you know, people just wanted it regulated. That's all they wanted. They wanted it in different coloured bottles and different shaped bottles, and sure, that's what happened. We might have alcohol problems now, and it may be a problem of modern society, but we're certainly not having moonshine issues and corruption issues that was the norm under that kind of prohibition. So, with cannabis, so we have gone from this, you know, innocuous plant that was just grown in gardens or a weed, and to now the equivalent of moonshine. The majority of the Australian cannabis is hydroponic. It is the equivalent of moonshine. People are, you know, growing it to be more, you know, more bang for your buck. They can, you know, grow it right in the cities. You don't even have to need big open areas with police and neighbours and helicopters flying over. It really is a big black market. It's quite big. I don't know if people know this. The Clements out of West Australia, Curtin University, did a study on the social use of cannabis by Australians, and found, and this was a lot of input by the Australian Taxation Department, the Australian Hoteliers Association, the Australian Electrical Supply Association, and they found that Australians smoke about $5 billion worth of cannabis a year on the black market. That's twice the size of the wine industry. It's doing very, very well. So, you know, at times I think as a party, we've definitely prioritised our point of attack. We want medical cannabis to be looked at, and industrial and hemp seed food to be looked at first. You know, recreational, social use of cannabis is doing really, really well. It doesn't need government's help. But if they'd like to have a look at regulating it and taxing it, we'd definitely like to speak to them. So that's where we are at now. I think probably should talk about what's happening now. Last week I was down in Sydney. I met one of the Sydney University doctors and who have started trials with Sativex, and certainly, you know, what I can say is those researchers from the Lambert Foundation and even from the Sydney Uni, they're trying their hardest. They went into this believing the government as well, that they were, you know, now they had a $34 million donation, private donation. They wouldn't need government assistance. They had their own money and they'd be able to, you know, really work independently, but that hasn't proved to be the case. They really want to, and I can say honestly, they are striving, looking at every little loophole all over the world to try and get a supply of cannabis for them to do some genuine, meaningful medical cannabis research. And at this stage, you know, growing some in Australia is really, especially by an Australian company, is a pipe dream. So they're trying to do whatever they can to move these things forward, and hopefully one or two of them might be here at Mardi Gras to speak about the trials that they've commenced. There is some more crossover here We talked about one of the trials that they've just started. They're giving a Sativex product to patients who are undergoing chemotherapy as something to address the side effects. And he's giving them a letter that they're on a clinical trial. This is in case they get caught driving, that they're on a clinical trial and they're using cannabis. But he says himself that, it's really not worth the paper it's written on, because part of the deal on being on this clinical trial is that you agree that using cannabis, if you were to be detected by police, it's not a defence. So you really still are on your own with this. So just as the hemp seed and the hemp industry want saliva testing addressed because it's holding back the entire industry, we also, there's now clinicians asking questions and wanting the saliva testing issue addressed as well, because it'll really hobble any kind of research and work they can do to have a look at, getting some medical cannabis up. And it's not lost on them that they're talking with many other countries about doing, who are, in infant stages and trying and doing some, trials that, the whole issue of saliva testing is just so ridiculous for them to even explain to other countries that, who have, even in the US and Canada, where medical cannabis is up and going, you'd think that, governments who aren't approving would jump at the chance of using saliva tests to at least keep a lid on things, but they aren't, because the products really are unreliable. They don't detect impairment. There's just something very fishy going on. I suppose the last thing I want to leave people on is try and pass on some scepticism about the stories you might read in the paper and what politicians are saying and the promises that they're making. And it's really hardcore. You're going to see politicians holding sick people's hands, and if you really read what they're saying, they're lying to those people. They've been doing it for a long time. I've seen Bob Carr do it. He said it was the government's duty to get medical cannabis up and going, and done visits to oncology departments in health, in hospitals, and made these promises that they knew they couldn't keep, and we're seeing it over again now. But what to take away is, read with scepticism about what they're saying. Tell you what I'm missing out, a whole talk about really being sceptical about the claims made about the benefits of cannabis for medical purposes, especially on the web. They really just go too far. They're really, when doctors and the AMA get up and say there's not enough clinical trials to determine if this is good or not, that's true. That is absolutely true. A lot of the trials that people do quote from are really just test tube stuff. And when you're talking about cancer, bleach will kill cancer in a test tube. Turmeric will kill cancer, will kill it. And there's a lot of things, but whether that translates into the body and certainly going from injecting, purified cannabinoids into cancer cells is certainly a lot different from orally taking large doses to try and, cure a malignant lung tumour. They're far, far different. And so, in terms of cannabis's therapeutic benefits, I think it's going to be, if all goes well, I think it'll be one of the most important, certainly in the top 10 drugs used in medicine, as it was before 1930. And I think that we just have to bear that in mind. So be sceptical of what you're reading about its benefits, be sceptical about what governments are doing, and don't be scared to speak to your local member. Don't be scared to pass on information. Really, we really have to pass, keep the pressure on all political parties, and especially send the word through to your local member. And if you do kind of start reading these stories that they're talking about and start, go back through Google and read what the same politician or their party was saying, last year, the year before, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And if you're seeing a pattern there of these same words but nothing happening, point that out to them. And that's how we're going to really get to this. There are international roadblocks. We can do it. The researchers are doing the same now. They're in all reality, they are newbies to this, and they don't mind saying that because they've never done medical cannabis research before. there really isn't much on it. Like I was saying, for the last 70 years, there's been one lawful source of medical cannabis that has only been funding and supplying researchers who are looking at negative consequences. So the propaganda, was built on very good foundations, and they've always had it. If you can try and make the analogy between opium and cannabis, that they are the same. Coca, by the way, was the same. Coca was something that was grown all up and through the South America. It was an important part of their customs and culture, and they can still use it culturally. People still choose coca. But when the pharmaceutical companies jumped on and developed that 1935 or 33 UN Drug Convention, the first one, they really took opium, coca and hashish off the world and gave it to a handful of companies. It's interesting, I have read right back to the original document, and in relation to coca, I think it was 2 companies got the medical use of coca. 400, nowadays there's about 400 licensed coca farmers in Colombia only. No other South American country is really allowed to grow it. It was interesting, 3 different occasions the words and a soft drink syrup is right there in the UN Drug Convention. So back in the 30s, you had Coca-Cola was sitting in that room to ensure that it was going to get a steady supply of decoconized coca extract for its soft drink syrup that, gives you an idea of, Coca-Cola, where they are in the world and where, the companies, for instance, have got opium. You had Merck, Pfizer, Eli Lilly, GlaxoSmithKline. These are variations. There was 8 originally. They've cannibalised each other down about 3 or 4. But all these companies are in the top 100 entities of the world. They are more rich than most countries in the world. So, they have a fair bit of control. They have a tap, basically a free tap into every government's GDP through governments having to stipulate up front what percentage of GDP will be spent on health. And that's made up of not only hospital and doctors and trainings and nurses and universities, it also is directly linked to PBS. The Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme is a way that governments give directly to the companies vast amounts of money to make these relatively cheap products that they're allowed to monopolise, drugs and so forth for medical purposes, that they charge our governments extraordinary amounts of money for, and the PBS is that direct link of money from every country's economy straight to a handful of really big companies, so that they'll charge us less for them. So when governments are talking about another $1 billion for a particular product to be subsidised under PBS, that's another $1 billion going straight to a company, and they want us to be really thankful for. And these, the other part of it is you've got, international patents. This is all part of that international obstacles. If a drug is going to cost $16,000 or $20,000 a year for a particular patient, we've got a few thousand patients, surely we should be able to develop that product here or something similar. But you can't do that. There's patent laws. There's laws that last for so many years. There's grandfather. You're not allowed to do it. And we're in the same situation now with cannabis, and even that product from GW Pharmaceuticals. One of the criticisms of it is that it's so expensive. You're looking at a 5.5 ml bottle, a spray bottle, costing about $220. That's for 1 week's supply. I mean, this stuff, it's worth 20 cents. That's what it's really worth, and probably even cheaper. We talk about gram price for cannabis. Most people, around here, cannabis is about $10 a gram in the cities. People are paying, $20 odd a gram. $1 a gram for cannabis, that's $1 million a tonne. That's the most expensive commodity you could ever get. So there's all these issues and all these interesting facts sometimes too about cannabis and why isn't it allowed in the world, and why governments like now, what we're doing, state governments, federal government, are going to spend a lot of money to slow this down. And it might not be their own fault, but you know, all this slowing down is to appease the population or to try and that's shielding us from the real truth that, you know, they can't do it. No country can do it. You know, if we are, you know, it's going to be very slow. And even when we look at, you know, the introduction of you know, when our government is doing some work, trials with GW Pharmaceuticals, in actual fact, they're bending the rules, you know. They're letting this company in. There was another one mentioned more recently, Tilray, a very, very new Canadian company. I mean, the regulations and laws around Canadian companies like Tilray, they're what's known as an LP, a licensed producer. They're only very new laws. They're less than 2 years old. But, you know, Sydney Uni is talking about doing a trial with a product that they intend to develop, and that they'll do more trials with products as they develop them. And the reason why we're going with GW Pharmaceuticals and Tilray is because time's too short, and no Australian company will have time to develop a product in the meantime. But, you know, I still look at it, it's not even a race to the finish. We haven't got to the starting block on medical cannabis and real medical cannabis science and research. You know, while governments try and trick you that they're folding us into, you know, clinical trials overseas, it really is just part of a ploy that's slowing it down, not just here, all over the world. And but we've got to keep fighting. That's what the Hemp Party does. And but I hope I've just made you a bit more aware to cut through some of the you know, the words that have been spoken. Yeah. And yeah, any questions they will try and answer.
Please come to the microphone.
I'm from the UK. Can I update you on what we do in the UK and what's available? I can buy CBD oil with 0.3% THC from Amazon.co.uk, certified for...
Amazon?
Yes.
Are they a pharmaceutical company?
No. Amazon...
Is that product legal?
Yes. In the UK, I can buy CBD oil with less than 0.3% THC.
Is it sold as a foodstuff?
It's sold under medical on Amazon.
I've spoken about this, and
I use it.
Yeah.
And I know people who use it for epilepsy, and it stops their epileptic fits.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of products getting around, and look, with the CBD oil, and you know, some
I
of the
just want
stuff...
to raise your awareness that in the UK, my niece is applying for a hemp, industrial hemp.
Are you going to your doctor and getting a prescription for... Your doctor doesn't want anything to do with it?
No, my doctor doesn't want to know
anything.
anything.
So that's not the kind of medical cannabis I'm talking about there, no.
He's not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it really is, it's not happening over there. It's you know, I mean, they're presenting us with GW Pharmaceuticals as though it's the missing link. Has GW Pharmaceuticals helped much in terms of broader medical cannabis access for patients?
We are no longer prosecuted if we're found growing through plants, because the situation over there is the police are not interested anymore.
Yeah. When we're talking about medical cannabis, and especially if I'm talking as a lobbyist, talking to governments, and you know, in reply to what governments are saying here in Australia, you know, we can really only talk about the full medical application and its acceptance into the medical profession. So the product that you're advising me of is something you're just buying over the web that you probably couldn't tell me if there has been clinical trials done on that product.
No, it comes from Amsterdam.
Yeah,
it's from Holland,
sure.
And it's certified product.
Yeah.
I've been over there. I've done trips.
But it's not something that your doctor can prescribe. And
My doctor won't prescribe it.
I suppose that's what I'm talking about. Look, I can go on the web and get a bunch of stuff.
I just wondered if you could do that here in Australia, whether you could buy CBD
on the web. Yeah, sure. There's companies that are portraying that, you know, they're from Northern Europe and they're producing, you know, medical grade high CBD oil from up there, and they're exporting it all over the world. I'm very sceptical of that. I'm a hemp grower, and I know that they can't. The season isn't long enough up there for hemp growing. They have their seed produced down in France. The seed is taken to Northern Europe. They grow they have a shorter growing season, and their hemp is really cut early for fibre. They don't get to full maturity. What we do know is that there's a lot of companies in the US and right through Europe who are buying big bales, open bales of Chinese whole hemp plants, taking them back to their countries, having them delivered as hemp, and doing big chemical extractions and removing cannabinoids as well as residual pesticides and herbicides, and delivering it to people as a medicine, skirting around laws, calling it a foodstuff. That's happening all over. There's I direct people to sites like the CBD project where they uncovered a lot of that. There's DEA reports more recently where they've had to re-clarify what hemp oil is, what CBD oil is, what hemp seed oil is, because there's too many tricky words being used that aren't very specific. If you've got a cannabinoid product for medical purposes, you put that on there. You don't call it a hemp oil or use confusing words. This confusion is it's hard for it's hard to be addressed. I was talking to Carl from Canada more just today, and where that problem has come up. But yeah, on the web, it's very, very hard to know whether a product is really registered, what claims are being made about it, whether there has been clinical trial. But I think the big test is if you can't go to your doctor and get a prescription for it, well then it's not, the kind of push we're talking about with government. That's what we're asking for. And as I talk about, the big amount of people, the most people who would benefit from cannabis are those who just really want to go to a doctor and get a prescription and have their ailment dealt with. Yeah. Hey.
So speaking as someone who'd like to be able to go to a doctor and get a prescription, but you probably don't know, as a gay man, born in 59, a little preamble, I wasn't legal in this country until 1988, certainly not in New South Wales, and it wasn't legal for me to do anything until 94 with the person I love. Cut a long story short, we're about to have a, $160 million plebiscite to see whether I'm allowed to marry the person that I love now in 2016. Supposedly we have all the other rights, although my boyfriend won't hold my hand or kiss me in public, still. And that's no comment on him, that's a comment on the fear that every gay person in this community feels, and I'm not hijacking, I've got a point, feels what it is to be gay in this community. That's how I think a lot of smokers feel as well. So my point is, one, don't give up. It was 30 years before I was allowed to actually occupy a bed with another man, and as a person who's been HIV positive since 1979, from blood taken then and tested in 1984, and on the antivirals for 20 years, which work, but the early ones did pretty despicable things to your body. Don't give up, don't stop the fight. But two, can we hijack this plebiscite that we're about to spend a lot of money on and put in a second question about medical cannabis or about legalising cannabis, such as I've seen in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, as you know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, what happened in those US states, they have citizens, through the Constitution, they can have citizens-initiated referendums. And they do every election and every midterm election, and there's a whole bunch of questions in some states. Sometimes some states it's 4, sometimes 7, and it has started back in 1996 in California where they got a medical cannabis one up. And they take their referendums a bit more serious than us, and obviously, every time we talk about referendums over here, it's, we always vote no, that's what Australians do. Look, the plebiscite on marriage equality, I just think they're tricking you guys. They're not going to have that. They're just going to string it along, Yeah. And so it's the same with cannabis. And for the majority of people in Australia who do use cannabis, I don't often make the analogy with gay rights, but I do sometimes. And it's just the same. Before 78, before 88, when it was illegal to be gay, You know, if there was no gay people, we thought. If the media wanted to see, you know, gay people, they'd go to Oxford Street. They could be anywhere in the world or Australia, but you had to go to Oxford Street. It's the same here in Nimbin. When there's 1 million, 2 million pot smokers in Australia, but when the media want to do a portray pot smokers, they come here to Nimbin. We oblige, but you know, it's just that. So, but geez, after '88, when they changed the laws, seems there was gays everywhere. You know, from one minute you had cops bashing gays, the next minute it turns out, geez, they were with their partner the night before. Judges, lawyers, police, right through the judiciary, right through, you know, just normal walks of life everywhere. 10% of blokes turned out they were gay, and it was just normal. It was, you know, but even still now, and like Pete points out, you know, living with it, there's still a lot who just won't come out of the closet, and there's still a lot who are really scared. And I see the I've been disheartened, and I more recently last Friday I was down in Victoria and watched it. So, you know, we can go to the city, you know, Nimbin, you know, in the same context as what Oxford Street would have been back then. Nimbin, cannabis law reform, we want to take it to the city and invite people to come out, all you millions of pot smokers. We go to Parliament House, we're well received by the politicians, but the people are too scared to come out. It's really hard for them. They don't want to be identified, they could lose their job if workmates find out, someone don't want friends and family to know. And I'm sure it would have been the same for a lot of gay people back then, and still now to this day. I was down in Melbourne last week where a woman in her 70s, Heather Gladman, had begun a hunger strike. She'd been growing medical cannabis. She's an ex-nurse, had kept patients and obviously knew people who could do better by cannabis, and she'd been doing that for quite a while. She got caught. She went on a hunger strike. After a week at home, she moved the Sunday prior to Treasury Gardens outside the Victorian Parliament. And you know what, when she came there was only 8 people. She was so disappointed. She really expected there was going to be a sea of tents and all these people would come out. But people are scared, and you know, that's why we went down as well. Hemp Party, I went down just to talk to her about that it goes on all over the world, and all over the country. People are scared. You know, you could, you know, count all the people in Nimbin who smoke pot, and go to any city and pick out 5 suburbs, and you're going to have more people who smoke pot and are trading pot. It really, Nimbin is just a small part of it. And thanks for pointing that out, Pete. Yeah, and people, you know, we're not asking you to come out, and you know, but definitely keep it in mind and be more open about it. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I just wondered if you're aware of the special access scheme that they've got now in Queensland, where you can actually, I've been trying to get this for Jason, you can go to your doctor, you get a script from the doctor, the script goes down to the TGA for approval, then you have to actually source it yourself from overseas, and then the chemist is the one who imports it.
Yeah. Special access scheme.
Yeah, my doctor, he said no, he said I'll have everyone on my door. Yeah, like he wouldn't give me the script.
Yeah, no, look, that's one of those red herrings. And look, if you have a look at the final report of the inquiry into the regulator bill, you'll see where they address the issue of the special access scheme. And it's one of those things that, yeah, Queensland government's pulled it out again, and I think they use it with the Lene, and she believes that she can get the product that she uses in Colorado. Those products aren't registered, they're not legal. You can't bring them in, you can't. There was a gentleman here, so not only do we portray that we're more pottier than everyone else, we've got some of the best minds here on medical cannabis researchers. You know, there's at least 2 PhDs. So Dr. Graham Irvine, he done a PhD, he's a doctor now, the legalisation of medical cannabis in New South Wales, and he looked at that special access scheme, and he had a condition, Parkinson's, the onset of Parkinson's, and he managed to get in. The only thing he could get in was Sativex. Cost him, you know, nearly over $1,000 just for the product, let alone all the paperwork, and it's all in his PhD. He sort of runs right through it. You know, unless you can find, you know, a registered or product that the government is going to allow you to bend the rules on. Back at the end of it, so when New South Wales talked to Bob Carr when he was promoting medical cannabis, So they let that collect dust, and then people forgot, and then we ended up with a health minister called Reva Ma, who, you know, again, we pushed it a bit through government. We lobbied hard, and we got them to raise it again, and she said, well, we are going to start a trial. We're going to make it easier for people to import Sativex, but that never happened at all. It didn't make it easier. Doctors wouldn't do it, and I probably should. I've got a couple of empty bottles of it. Yeah, yeah, and it really is just a tincture. If you check out the Hemp Embassy or out the front, there's a product, Agathiopian oil, which is just the same, and it works just as good, and it's yeah, 10 times cheaper. Yeah. So, you know, the people, you know, the special access scheme, I'm sorry I'm a bit blunt sometimes, but yeah, it's one of these red herrings that the government's thrown up. And I should just point out the changes to the Narcotics Act that the federal governments are talking about. It really is, at the very most, it will maybe get, and we're paying GW Pharmaceuticals $3.1 million, and I suppose the Narcotic Act changes are an extension to the announcements made late last year by Prue Goward and Susan Lay, the missing link part that we went over to Britain, we signed a $3.1 million deal with GW Pharmaceuticals to allow to do some trials with Sativex and allow some children with paediatric epilepsy into a ongoing stage 2 clinical, phase 2 clinical trials that are ongoing overseas. That will be in on that, and that they'll grow some over here for that trial. So that you know, the changes that they're calling on the Narcotics Act, it really, if you have a look at the details and the proposal, it really is only for a company, generally foreign, that may have some kind of tenuous access to a lawful source of cannabis that they can grow. Because there's nothing legal, they can't say it's for medical purposes. They can only say it can be grown for trials leading or product development. Yeah. So it really is a long, slow process. Either way, we're looking at. And look, Hemp Embassy, we make no apology. We push them on that side of things, and if we're going to do it by way of government, we'll push them on that side. But we also know that with the stroke of a pen, our government can just say, we're going to do it. We'll do something like a Canadian model. We'll do something like an American model. I hope that there's enough intelligence out there that we can grab the good parts of those models and build good cottage industries around it. You know, even if it's like, you know, a handful of facilities, growing facilities in various states that want to be involved. That's a start. If we could get cottage industry or something like that going, that's fine too. But I suppose more importantly, and when I speak about the majority of people who just want to go to, you know, a doctor and get a prescription, they want a good, clean product. You know, that's why we have pubs and all of that. People can brew at home, and others do. But you know, why, when you can just go and get a product, you know, and that's what human nature is all about. And so I'm not going to try and change that. But when we are talking about cottage industries around medical cannabis, I want to make sure that we're going to do our part for safety and well-being of people, and very sick people who, you know, we don't want them buying dodgy stuff. And, you know, in Tom, Dick and Harry, there is a lot of, you know, things that we, you know, well, if we can have a say on it, yeah, what we would prefer. And people who want to be serious about, you know, growing medical cannabis and being involved, you know, hopefully, with a government stroke of a pen, you know, that can all happen. Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully any of this has helped. Yeah. And I'll pass you on to Michael. Thanks.
Good on you. Andrew, quite a lot of us here, full on, takes over your life, this cause, and it kind of crept up on me. Anyway, my kids have left home and I've got no excuses, so it totally takes over your life. Anyway.